Final Fantasy XVI is one of the most polarizing entries the series has ever seen, headed up by a renowned team of developers known for Final Fantasy XIV, and the resurrection and prosperity that entry has seen, making a single-player, mainline Final Fantasy game. How would it stack up? Would a new direction for the combat and overall gameplay loop be well implemented or poorly implemented? What about the lack of an open world like in Final Fantasy XV? A return to form for high fantasy set in a medieval setting with a very mature storyline throughout? How would this be received? How would this land? Well, today I'm here to give my review for Final Fantasy XVI. So let's deep dive right on into this. And to start us off, in my opinion, Final Fantasy XVI is not only one of the best games released this year, in an absolutely stacked year for game releases, I also think that Final Fantasy XVI is one of the best Final Fantasy games in the franchise. To me, it's more than lived up to what it needed to do and what it could do. While it may contain some personal pitfalls that didn't necessarily land for me, I think on the whole and as a complete package, this is a massive return to form for the franchise. So let's talk about the direction. Now, this is easily the most polarizing aspect of Final Fantasy XVI, because not everybody, especially long-term fans of Final Fantasy, are going to appreciate the real-time Devil May Cry-esque combat that 16 implements into the series. Final Fantasy over the last 20 or so years has tried many different styles and flavors of combat, to varying degrees of success, and in 15, while it had some cool ideas and practices behind it, most of it just kind of felt clunky and unintuitive, holding down buttons in different directions on the analog stick for various combos, a magic system that felt a far cry from the renowned magic system and hierarchy that the franchise is known for. While 16 takes another deviation and tries its own spin on things, a combo-centric, ability-focused Devil May Cry, fast-paced, combo-oriented experience where magic largely takes the form of these abilities you utilize to extend combos, for magic burst windows, or to just do more damage, while also doubling as various iconic abilities that you can slot in as if you're creating your own loadout. Each of the main icons, or summons if you're an older school Final Fantasy fan, gives you access to a utility ability and 3 separate mainline abilities to utilize. If you rank them up enough and master them, then you can equip those abilities on different icons as well to create builds all of your own. And in the late game, I especially made use of that feature. The combat is fast-paced. There's no attempt to be turn-based like in Final Fantasy VII Remake with the ATB system. There's none of that here. It's fast-paced, it's constant, it's high adrenaline action. And that overall direction, as well as the shift to an M rating to tell a more mature story with more mature themes, and not having to beat around the proverbial bush to convey certain storylines and you can just show it or talk about it, will be polarizing to some, but for me it absolutely landed. And for me, made Final Fantasy XVI still feel like a Final Fantasy game at its heart, but also as if the series is maturing with the fan base, and is willing to tell more mature themes and storylines. Not afraid to shy away from certain aspects or topics, able to weave in subtlety or bluntness when it's appropriate. I really appreciated that aspect of Final Fantasy XVI. So for me, the direction shift that 16 provides, I don't know if I want every Final Fantasy game to follow this trend exactly, but I would not be opposed to more Final Fantasy games with this overall tone and atmosphere. I found it positively engrossing, while also making 16 a unique entry in the series. One that feels like it's trying to age with the player base, while also appealing to new audiences, and that is something that I think Final Fantasy absolutely needs. When it comes to the gameplay itself, I think as a whole, I'm very positive about the gameplay loop. It's very fun and customizable, and while the crafting system is very one-dimensional and honestly uninspired in a lot of ways, just kind of felt like a bit of filler, the gameplay loop itself, that combat, is really fun, and I loved the iconic battles, where you turn into a Fleet, where you take control of Phoenix, and you fight another giant summon that you know and love from previous Final Fantasy games, but with 16's unique twist on things. These fights mostly felt different. They were bombastic and epic, while still having some mechanical complexity. Having you learn the fights, learn these mechanics, in a style that felt very reminiscent of the gameplay loop from Final Fantasy XIV, at least in terms of boss fights. A lot of learning the combos and dodges, as if these fights boil down to a big theatric dance that you need to learn each step to in order to optimize your damage. It never really felt unfair, and while I would have appreciated a harder difficulty right off rip, and I don't see why we had to play the game for our initial playthrough with only normal mode, I felt the gameplay and the bosses to be really fun, each felt different, and to add to the overall experience. No two bosses really ever felt the same unless they were just kind of like a copy and paste hunt every now and then, but even then, there were some pretty unique hunts to find and fight. And bosses that would kind of be boss fights from before may turn into a mini-boss later on. And you can use the knowledge you gained beforehand alongside your new abilities and new power to overcome those challenges way easier. It was an interesting form of progression, and I liked that aspect to it. And the boss fights all felt different to one another and were really fun, especially the iconic fights, because those were my biggest points of contention before the release, because I thought they may fall into a trap where they rely too much on spectacle and the visuals and the feel of a fight, while foregoing a lot of the cool complexities and mechanics that a boss fight can be truly memorable for. That's now really the case. Yeah, fighting as Ifrit is a little bit more simple, well, a lot more simple, than playing as Clive in his human form. However, you still have combos, you still have some abilities that you can learn throughout the game that makes those scenarios not feel like you're just spamming one button over and over. I really appreciated that aspect of Final Fantasy XVI, and I don't think any of those icon fights ever outstayed their welcome or dragged on for too long. They were really well paced, and when I wanted more, they gave me more, and when I'm like, you know what, pretty good place to stop, they stopped. So for me, that aspect was very well handled on the whole. Maybe at the end, a little bit, I could have used a little bit more, but I get what they were going for. And I think when the best fight in the game is your final fight, at least in my opinion mechanically, that's a really good sign, because it just builds and builds and builds. Love that element of it. There's one aspect of the gameplay loop I was not that big of a fan of, and that was the actual powers themselves. I think Phoenix, Ifrit, Garuda, and Titan were probably my icons that I enjoyed utilizing the most. Slight issue with that, those were the demo guys, so you get them relatively early on, except for Titan. But the reason I enjoyed those forms a lot was because they were quick, and the abilities that you got from those utilized the kit in interesting ways and felt like they naturally synergized with the speed and pace of the combat. A lot of the later iconic forms either felt like they lacked the damage by themselves and required different synergies, like Odin, where his abilities themselves kind of hit like a wet noodle. However, where they really come into play is they may do a little bit of will gauge damage, or, which leads to staggers by the way, or you're building up this gauge, Zantetsuken, for one big hit at the end of building up your entire gauge. Which is cool, but I would really like it if Odin's regular abilities just didn't feel like I was wasting my time just building up to this one gauge. Bahamut overall felt very passive in his playstyle and wasn't really my jam, because he required a lot of channeled abilities that slowed the pace of the combat down, or his abilities were very passive that just kind of operated while you did other things. Again, it's going to be down to personal preference and personal taste, but they just weren't to mine. Ramuh's abilities were very quick, but they were just kind of, you press it once and you're good. Though I did enjoy Ramuh as a whole, I think he had this one ability, right, that put down this, like, lightning totem. And half the time for me, this ability was just more frustrating than anything because I would just happen to target it instead of the enemy that I was trying to combo. And you can utilize that lightning totem in interesting ways, but sometimes it just annoyed me. I think also a lot of the combat loop kind of relied upon you utilizing your abilities, your iconic abilities, to an effective degree. And sometimes as you get into that loop, you kind of miss out on the fun or the pace of the regular combo system because you're focusing so much on utilizing your abilities. So personally, if they ever revisit this combat style, I would love it if maybe they would implement a light attack button and a strong attack button in addition to the magic ability, so that we could have more combos, so that more iconic abilities could play off of those combos instead of feeling like your main magic burst combo felt like filler. Instead of having that be the case, at least for me, I would like to see like light and strong attack or something along those lines. More abilities that worked off of those combos, unlike Bahamut that just kind of felt like fire and forget, that really played off of the pace and natural pace of the combat. overall, I'm still very optimistic and satisfied with the combat loop. There's just some iterations I would like to see done to it in the future. Now let's talk about the story. The story itself is very good. The fact that we're able to shove all this world building and character development into a Final Fantasy length game. My god. I'm not joking when I say, you tell me a location from 16 and I can probably remember a character or a storyline that happened there. They fleshed this world out immaculately and masterfully, and I think they do it through two different ways: pacing and side quests. The pacing of the game overall is very well handled, where you are introduced to these various locations and characters and you get a decent chunk of story for them, and if you want to explore them more, then you can do the side quests, where they'll really go into these characters' backstories or the politics and the goings-on of those locations, and the world changes through the side quests as well. You feel like you're accomplishing something. And there's a great range of emotional resonance in these side quests, ranging from sad and depressing to really bombastic and cool. They flesh out the world in a way that would feel off-putting or too slow if they were implemented in the main story, but they suit side questing perfectly. Not every side quest is well done or well handled, some of them feel like filler, but when the side quests really land, they flesh out the world in perfect ways in my opinion, while also building up and out the main cast of characters' backstories and dynamics with one another. It's really well handled in my opinion, and it never feels like any one location outstays its welcome when it comes to the main story. You're constantly going from one location to the other, dealing with new characters and new problems, but they never feel like they're underdeveloped or underutilized. Like maybe the main Dhalmekia city I could have done with a little bit more of, but like that's like a small thing for me. The game as a whole is very well handled. Clive is an amazing protagonist. He's honestly one of my favorite protagonists in the entire series. He's badass, he's cool, he's great lines, great story moments, he's emotional, and he never feels contrived or really stupid. He is one of those types of characters that just clicks for me. And that goes with pretty much most characters in this game. I either love to hate them, or just love them flat out. There's no character that I actively disliked. Like, the closest may have been Mid, just because her quests kind of felt like, okay, like, I get what we're doing here, but we can, like, wrap this up quicker, right? But even then, they would be sprinkled with very emotional scenes about her storyline overall. Torgal was a great companion, Jill was amazing, Dion is one of the best characters as well, I love him. Byron, amazing S-tier character. The villains were great, you loved to hate them, and they ranged in how they were a villain. You hated Annabelle and Kuka and Benedicta for different reasons, and that goes with all the others as well. Even like the main villain, you know, the guy whose name begins with U, I thought he was well handled, like on the whole. It's a style of villain that's easy to be just kind of like, okay, he's not that interesting, right? But I felt that he was really well handled, who played off the themes and motifs of the story and themes of the game. And I made a video a few days ago on this, but my biggest weakness and biggest critique of Final Fantasy XVI for me is the ending. I'm not a fan of it, but I'm not going to dwell on it too much in this video. I've already made a video about that. But I'll say this. I just talked about my least favorite aspect. My favorite aspect may be the music. My god, Soken and the soundtrack overall was incredible. Find Your Flame or Find the Flame. Oh my god, whenever that song played, you felt the adrenaline course through your veins. It was so clean. And I love the way they didn't shy away from things in this game. If a character died, they showed you them die, and they played off of that. Like, yes, this game has a massive body count in terms of deaths, but none of them really felt extraneous or overdone. It's just a dark story, and those deaths made the story better in my opinion. Pushing along the themes, developing characters, fleshing out the world, it was very well handled in my opinion. And I loved Final Fantasy 15, but to me, this game and 15 are polar opposites, where 15 had a controversial journey where its biggest issue was pacing and just finding its footing, developing its world and its overall plotline, and in my opinion having an amazing ending. 16's the opposite. where the pacing and the story and the cast of characters are all extremely well handled, well implemented, and developed. You care about the world of Alstea. Nothing really ever outstays its welcome or feels like it needs more development. I never got that feeling from 16. It's just the ending is not my favorite. I don't like the ending, but I also don't think that the ending completely ruins the whole experience. I would still fully recommend you play Final Fantasy 16. Form your own conclusions. Form your own conclusion about the ending, because we may disagree about that, and that is fine. That is the nature of video game critique and discourse, and that to me is when really cool conversations can spawn as a result of that disagreement. But to me, Final Fantasy XVI is a quality, complete experience from top to bottom, and one of the best entries the series has seen in dang near 20 years, if not more. I hold this game in very high regard when it comes to Final Fantasy as a whole, and for me, it will be hard to knock this game off my throne for Game of the Year in 2023. The only reason it may not end up being my Game of the Year is just because of how stacked this year is as a whole. But in terms of being a complete experience, very few games hit as hard as Final Fantasy XVI in my opinion. But leave a comment down below with your thoughts. Have you played Final Fantasy XVI? Have you not played Final Fantasy XVI? Let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts, hear your opinions, and hear your perspectives. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day, go play some video games if you can, and as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye bye everybody, until we meet again.